This podcast is rated E for explicit and by category of true crime contains language and descriptions of crimes not suitable for young or sensitive listeners.
There are some amazing things that Mary Plummer left on this earth, aside from her three amazing kids. A, her recipe box, but B, she would always do this thing, like when she would get excited, she'd come running in the room going, "Ah!" and shaking her hands back and forth. I spend so much time talking about how she died. I rarely ever get to talk about how she lived. She knew how to show that she was totally excited. She knew how to really make a home a home. I mean, I don't even know how to put my finger on it, but it's something that it's just that feeling in your belly when you walk in a place and it feels good. And that's what she was able to do.
Of course, a spouse will always be the first suspect in a homicide, and some will have doubts, especially when a case goes cold. Now that we know a little bit about how special she was, we join Amy's interview with Mary Jo, Mary Plummer's daughter. In the 1988 homicide, it's time to look for the suspects, starting with Mary's husband. This is part 2 of Why Mary? What about Steve? And you're listening to The Cold Case Chronicles.
I know your secret. I know the truth. I know your secrets and I'm telling on you.
Before my parents divorced, they separated when I was in 3rd grade. And up until that point, she was a stay-at-home mom, very active with whatever I was doing in school. I had a very predictable life. I mean, she was always home after school, always there before school, made our beds, always had our meals ready. You know, now that I'm 46 and looking back, I never appreciated how young she was, how much she probably had to have given up just to have me. And then 13 months later, turn around and have my brother. And,
right.
You know, 6 years later, have another brother. But, I mean, she was a great dancer. She was full of spunk. Before they divorced, I mean, she was just, you know, in my eyes, I just had a pretty normal, average home life. She took great care of me. Since she died, I have always mourned her death in so many different ways. And I think the hardest part is mourning it as you know, through different eyes. You know, when I turned 16, it was hard, but she'd only been gone for a few years. But then when I was 18, it's like every major milestone in my life, I experienced her loss again. Mm-hmm. And it feels different every single time. And, you know, I look back at some of the things that she was able to do, and I wonder how did she do it? Like when my parents divorced, my mom had never had a job a day in her life. And I think she was probably like only 28 years old, maybe. I think when I was 28, I didn't even kids then. And here she took it on. She took the 3 kids. She found a job with just, you know, her high school diploma and she made it work. And I can tell you as a kid, I did not make that easy for her. I would give anything just to be able to say thank you. You know, when she died, I was 14 and I was your typical freshman in high school. I was pushing my boundaries. We butted heads. But the weekend before she died, we went shopping together. And at the time, those brown Eastland shoes, the laces that you spun up on the outside, I wanted a pair of those. And we went shopping and just out of the blue, she bought those for me. And we had probably the best day together that I could have recalled within a few months of her passing. And I have always told myself that was God's way of just letting me know that the teenage mother-daughter drama I was going through was just that. It was just the phase. and that
Right.
life would not have always been like that. But after the divorce, she was stretched herself thin. Was still a great mom, still a great cook, did everything she could to
So
take
then
perfect care of us.
she had the custody then, right?
Yeah. Sorry, we lived with our mom. We saw our dad every other weekend and then every other week in the summer. She got through it. At the time, she was pretty hurt by the divorce. It was hard for her. It's hard for everybody, but it was hard for her. And again, I look back and think, God, how did you turn that around? And at the time I was critical, thinking, come on, bounce back. You can do this. Now I'm like, God, 3 kids, 28, never had a job, had only, been with my dad, and that was it. So she was much more of a fighter than I could see at the time. You probably heard she was pretty angry at my dad. They didn't fight a lot when I was younger, but after the divorce, they clashed. At the time, and I still see it this way today, and it's not the popular way to see it, but I saw both sides of their fight. While my mom would sometimes get irrational, my dad would typically try to stay calm. I look back and I think she was just a mom just trying to do her best.
Yeah.
There's no handbook for it.
Right. And it was probably hard being the fact that the person that he left her for was in the picture. We went through that in my life too. And my stepmom to this day is still the one who my dad left my mom for. And it was very hard to accept. Years later, it's just the norm now. But at the time, it was just normal for us to feel that hatred from her. But yet, at the same time, when we went to his house, we were expected to feel like we loved her. So it's very confusing. It's a very odd place to be in as a child.
It is. And my mom and dad came from the traditional big Catholic families. My mom went to grade school with my dad's sisters. When my dad left my mom, it wasn't just a shockwave through my mom and her family. It sent ripples through my dad's family. I mean, my grandma, his mom, for a brief period of time, shunned him. None of the kids were allowed to speak to him. And, you talk to my dad's family, and they adore my mom. They got to grow up with her in a sense that I never did. I just went to a wedding shower a couple weeks ago, and they still talk about her. Just true love.
That's good for you guys.
Oh my gosh.
Fabulous.
After she died, I thought that the divorce was ugly. Things got uglier than I ever could have imagined after she died. That's probably why I'm overly protective of probably everything. I try to control too much, but it was hard losing her. Still hard to this day, but it was compounded with the complete hate that just circulated and surfaced between my family. It was awful.
The day that it happened, you, I'm assuming, went to school that day, or was it Thanksgiving break yet?
No, it wasn't Thanksgiving break yet. She died on a Thursday night, late Thursday night, and Thanksgiving break was the next week. So got up, went to school, report card day. Grades were always important. That's why you heard about all those calls. Just a very normal day. And I will say this, when Mom moved back to Avon with Speed, she recreated a lot of the life that we had before the divorce. Things got easier. She was such a nester. I mean, she just made a home. And the cooking and it just had all those good feelings that you think of, especially in the November cozy time frame.
And you guys got along really well with Steve?
No.
Well,
my brothers did.
Okay.
I didn't. Yeah, but Steve and I, we had good days, but we had a lot of bad days too.
Yeah.
But he and my brothers, they had a great relationship. came home from school. She was getting ready to go to Lazarus. And so we went over how to finish making dinner, and that Steve was, I don't remember if Steve was already home or going to be home, but we went over how to finish making dinner and making sure that I got the boys to bed on time and asked that I save her a plate. We had in that little neighborhood, or just really a cul-de-sac we lived on, we had about 3 houses worth of friends, and so we all spent some time playing outside, and then she left.
By that time, Steve had to have been home because she took his car.
Correct.
Right.
He didn't eat dinner with us that night, so the boys and I just ate, at our dining room table and cleaned up after dinner.
Did he eat like by himself in his room?
No.
Or
he didn't eat anything that I made. I've got like 1,000 conspiracy theories, and one of my conspiracy theories was that he drugged the food that we ate because he didn't eat it. And this goes to my distrust of him. He didn't eat it. He, kind of just stayed to himself that night. I put the boys to bed, and I don't mean like put them to bed, but Josh was young, and so he was the kind that you tucked in, and they shared a bedroom. They kind of were knocked out. They went to sleep hard. I stayed up as late as I could, which wasn't really that late. And he was out on the couch, and it was, I'm going to go to bed. He said he was going to wait up for Mom. And I went to bed, and I didn't hear a thing. It just floors me. Like, we had a dog. And from what I have been told, it might not be true. The police actually had surrounded our house, and they were prepared for kind of a hostile situation. And I didn't hear any of that. The dog barking did not wake me up. When my parents divorced, I kind of stepped in as, mom part 2.
Right.
I didn't hear anything. I didn't even hear when 4-5 men walked into my bedroom. Didn't wake me up. They turned the light on. That didn't wake me up. My stepdad shaking me is what got me up. And I always thought, oh yeah, he drugged our food. And then he just walked to where she was killed, shot her, and came back home. That was one of my theories for a long time. And it's eaten at me forever. I did save that plate of food, and it was sitting in the fridge, and my brother Jake had gotten out of, this was after we told them that she had died, and they made us stay in the boys' bedroom, and I hated that. And Jake was feeling sick and my dad came out of the room to get him some water. One of my mom's sisters saw him and went to attack him, and Jake was right behind my dad. So we got that situation under control. Jake opens the fridge and sees her plate of food and just kind of broke down. And I took it out of the fridge and threw the whole thing in the trash. The great moments that, you wish that your mom was there to witness, or the bad moments when you wish that she was there to ask for advice. I don't have any of that. And I have a great, Donna, my stepmom she's been there for so many years, and she's wonderful, and she loves me, but there's never a replacement for a mom. There just isn't.
You just instantly moved in with your dad and stepmom?
Yeah, that was, the day that she died, we spent most of the day at the house. And it was a lot. I mean, we didn't go back to bed, and the police came at 1:00 in the morning. So it's the longest day I've ever had. My dad took Jake and Josh, and I went with my mom's family first we stopped by a TV station to give them a picture of my mom, and then we went to the funeral home. And so I went to the funeral home to plan the funeral, and then I went back to my dad's, and I didn't realize that we were moving in with him for probably like till the next day. And it was like, oh, I thought we were going back home. I thought, because I remember even talking about asking, am I going to be able to finish school, or am I going to have to stay home to take care of everybody? So I didn't even realize till probably the next day that we weren't going back.
So you just never saw Steve again?
Well, I mean, we saw him obviously throughout the entire funeral. We went back home. Pretty sure we saw him for Thanksgiving. I don't know. That whole week's kind of a blur.
Right.
But I know that we did go back home again for Christmas, and that was horrible. We did spend the night with him. It was after Christmas. We tried to have like a weekend visitation, and it was way too painful. He did take the boys a couple of different times. That was really it. I mean, we didn't know he moved until my mom's brother went out to the house to visit him, and there was just nobody there.
And that makes sense. If he lost his mom and sister shortly thereafter too, just staying in the town alone was probably really painful.
Yeah, maybe he's 28. I cannot even imagine going through all of that.
Yeah.
And I didn't make it easier. I mean, I know I didn't. I mean, so the police and Steve, the police came to the house. Obviously, Steve woke up, answered the door. Based on what Steve had always told me, they didn't speak for maybe a couple minutes, and then they went and got me. So they immediately started questioning both of us, and right out of the gate, I didn't like his answers. He didn't like my answers. They asked if there was a gun in the house. I said yes. He said no. I was like, yeah, you do. And I didn't know she was shot with a small handgun or whatever it was. I knew he had a gun. So I said yes. Well, he had like a rifle. So we just immediately we were clashing. So they separated us into two different rooms for questioning. So yeah, I didn't make anything easy for him. I know I didn't. So I could see why he would have left.
When the crew first decided to cover Mary's case, I asked the local community for information via Facebook. Several friends and family reached out with words of encouragement and hope for Mary's case. Dave and Julie were friends of Mary and Steve's. They worked together and they took care of each other's kids. Here's what they had to say.
We worked together at Overland Express, and Mary and I got close. We were both single parents. We lived in lower class housing back then. She was stuffed into this little apartment with her 3 kids, and I was in another neighborhood probably half a mile away with my son. It was in the mid-'80s, I want to say. My son was probably 4 or 5 years old, but she and I got close just because we were single parents, and she would help me pick up my son and take him to her apartment. They went to the same daycare, and I would do the same for her. We became friends that way, and we were just mom friends. And then, of course, we were work friends, and my husband, who I met at Overland, and Steve Plummer, who was at Overland. The 4 of us didn't get hooked up together, but we ended up dating each other, and we were friends. So we spent a lot of years, Christmas parties with them and work Christmas parties and whatnot. So basically that was our friendship. She got married to Steve, and they moved out to Avon, and she had this house. We were so happy for her to have a house to raise her kids in. And we moved out to Brownsburg, and we stayed in touch somewhat. It's hard when she was raising 3 and I was raising 1. And then she was gone.
How was she as a mother?
She was an amazing mother. Her kids were her first priority. I think we were so busy we didn't get into those conversations as to why she was in her situation, why she was left divorced with 3 kids. Or why I was, for that matter. We just kind of kept each other going through it. We had that in common, and we just tried to get through life and helping each other.
Can you tell me about Steve?
Steve was a great guy. I enjoyed his company. We had a lot of fun together, and I was so happy that he chose Mary, and that she was going to have somebody to help her raise these kids.
I first met Steve. I had moved down here. I was working at Overland Express up in Minnesota, and about probably 100 people actually transferred down here to Indianapolis. Steve was hired on there from here because he was living here in Indianapolis, and we just kind of hooked up. He was a great guy, 6 foot, probably 6'4", and funnier than hell. And another buddy of mine owned a boat, so all three of us did a lot of skiing together down at Lake Lemon for a number of years. I think this is in about '85 when I moved down here. Just a great guy, and I worked with him on second shift, and we just kind of kept hanging out together on weekends. And then Julie and I got married a few years later, and Mary and Steve got married. And again, like Julie said, we talked at work a little bit, and after a few years, Overland went belly up, so we all kind of went our separate way. And we keep in touch a little bit here and there, but basically nothing like we were in the beginning years.
Were either of you aware of any issues in their marriage at all?
No, I was not.
No, I was not either. I thought it was a fairy tale, in my mind, because she finally had somebody that loved her and was going to help her through this crazy life with kids.
Julie, were you aware of any infidelity at all on Mary's part?
No, definitely not on Mary's behalf, nor did I hear that about Steve, but definitely not Mary.
And Mr. Dave, were you aware of any on behalf of Steve?
No, never heard a peep of it.
I'll ask both of you to answer individually. What would it mean for you to get closure in this case?
It would mean more than anything to me because she didn't deserve this. All she did, her goal was to raise her kids and have a happy family. And she's laid there for all these years, and we don't have the finality. And I feel like she's helping us get to the truth by putting you guys out there and doing this.
I haven't talked to Steve in years, but I'd probably drive over to Kansas City and give him a big hug. I don't think about it every day, but I know he does. When I do think about it, it's just one of those things that it's tough.
Yeah, and we live with it. We've had to push it back for all these years. And then it's so real again. She just didn't deserve this.
More questions come to life as time moves on. Many people vehemently defend Steve, perhaps more so than those who think he's involved. Now the crew closes some loops in the theory of Steve.
I saw this Dateline episode and someone made the comment, it was something along the lines of, if a spouse is murdered, the first person you're going to look at is the one that's breathing.
Yeah.
The one left breathing. And that's the way it is. I mean, you're going to look at the husband every single time. So we have to look at Stephen.
Same for boyfriends and girlfriends.
Right. Any significant other. So the first person we have to look at is going to be Stephen. Stephen was born in the 60s, in 1960. He was the son of a doctor, grew up in Martinsville. He went to Martinsville High School and graduated in 1978, normal life. He then went on to Indiana University, majored in business. At the age of 21, he was married the first time. So he married his first wife, Dawn, and that marriage ended poorly. In fact, he was arrested for criminal trespassing after a domestic dispute with his first wife.
Oh.
Yeah.
That doesn't bode well.
No, it does not. For someone who everyone looks at as being calm and collective, it does not. Stephen and Mary started dating in 1985 when they were both working at Overland Express Trucking. They dated for about 2 years before they were married, and Stephen was actually 27 years old when he and Mary...
Oh, she was way older than him.
she was 33, he was 27. But it worked, and she had 3 kids. He took them in as if They were his own, and he got along really well with the boys. He and MJ kind of, I'm going to call her MJ because her name is also Mary Jo. So I'm going to just call her MJ. It's going to be less confusing. But they butted heads a little bit, but they still got along. The day of Mary's murder, he had used his car and gone to do a few errands for his work, but then he started feeling like he had the flu. And so he came home from work and allowed Mary to take his car to work that day. Before Mary left for work, I want to make sure that this is out there. Her daughter overheard her conversation on the phone, and she didn't know who she was calling, but her mom said, quote, "Hi, it's me. My work starts at 6:30 and it's over at 9. So she was telling someone specific that.
And they didn't think to check the phone records.
So they did, but it was a local call, so it didn't show up. Back then, whenever
it just showed
yes,
the
it
like
just
first
shows the long distance.
But it would show like the first 3 numbers, like the locality. So like if I called anywhere in like Irvington, it would show 353.
So that's all she said on that conversation. Who knows who she was talking to? It could have been anyone. It could have been someone at the store. She may have been talking to a coworker saying, yeah, I work 6:30 and I'm off at 9. You know, it may have been something insignificant.
And she was also planning on picking up those home interiors.
She had just got off the phone with someone that she was picking up the home interior for.
Oh,
so
she had already made call.
Yes. So this was the second call. She'd already talked to the person about the home interior. There's no known boyfriends or any kind of affairs. Everyone that knew them said that she and Steve were getting along just fine. According to the kids, she did have a little bit of debt that she was hiding from him, but aren't we all? Just kidding. We don't always tell our husbands everything that we buy. I mean, this week I bought a MacBook and I told him that. I was like, hey, look what you bought me,
Yeah. Andrew's always like, there's another package for you on the door. Like,
right.
What are you getting?
Or you're like, what, this old thing?
Yeah, I know.
I've had this for like a month.
Yeah, I've had this 2020 car for 5 years now. What are you talking about? That doesn't really raise a lot of red flags to me either. The most compelling thing to me is her daughter did say in an interview that she had seen bruises or hickeys in a chain configuration around her mother's neck.
Oh, first of all, you're too old to get hickeys. Sorry. You're not going to let that happen.
Hickeys are disgusting regardless.
Right,
I don't care how old you are, but
right.
Yeah.
And you're just too old to ever let that happen.
Could it have
But
been...
maybe she likes getting choked and her husband would be a part of that.
Did she maybe have like jewelry that she potentially like fell asleep in or was like leaning so that it dug into the skin?
But it is, I don't know. For a 14-year-old to recall that is pretty significant, I think. But it doesn't say that Steve did it. It could have been anything. And like you say, what if, some people are just into that. Nope. I'm not judging. I don't, to each his own. I don't know what your life's like. Maybe something was going on behind closed doors. He does have a past where he had a domestic dispute with his previous wife. I've tried to contact her. I can't find her, wondering, what that life was actually like with him, because obviously Mary's not here to tell us what was going on behind closed doors there.
Did MJ say how like their family dynamic was overall? Like, were there a lot of arguments? Did she feel comfortable around Steve?
Yeah, she said it was fine, other than, like if they got into an argument, he was they didn't really confront each other. If there was any kind of confrontation, he was more the type to be like pouting than
be argumentative.
Right.
Interesting for someone who has allegedly, the those charges are real.
That's not alleged.
No, those charges are real. That's interesting for someone who has a domestic violence history, that then you would just go and pout.
Right. Maybe he learned his lesson with the domestic and was like, okay, I need to watch my temper.
Right.
I mean, how old was he when that happened? He would have been like 22, 23.
Yeah.
I mean, that's still young enough. Your frontal lobe isn't fully formed, especially a man's frontal cortex.
Is it ever really formed?
No, but especially a dude's at 22, 23. It's not formed, so you could still learn a lesson. I mean, people get DUIs all the time around that age and never doing it again. So
yeah. Well, I'm not going to judge somebody for what they do in the heat of the moment one time. That's not
right.
But who knows if it's a pattern? She can't tell. She's not here to say.
But would she have told her sister? I feel like she and her sister talked a lot and shared a lot.
Right.
Because my sister knows every detail of every aspect of my life.
One other thing to point out is that Steve did pass a polygraph. He was very cooperative in all the investigation. They asked him in the polygraph if you killed Mary and if you had anything to do with her murder, and he said no, and he passed.
I mean, we don't rely on that.
We're not supposed to use that stuff anymore.
We don't rely heavily on that, but when you pass, right? People that fail aren't truthers.
Right. Truthers?
I ain't calling you a liar. I ain't calling you a truther. So, right? Like people that pass cleanly. It's like you don't have a false positive pregnancy test. You don't have a false fail lie detector test. Mm-hmm. We can't use it as evidence or rely on it, but we know, right?
Only psychopaths can pass.
And Steve's not a psychopath.
Right.
Sorry. He is intelligent, but he was not a psychopath.
No.
Yeah. So he passed a polygraph, which I feel like personally clears him of any wrongdoing. He was awake, according to MJ, whenever she and the boys went to bed that night. So she can't say 100% that he was still in the house when the murder occurred. But he was in the house when she was there that night. But of course, that's a big stretch to say he snuck out while the kids were there.
I would never meet anyone ever, especially my spouse, for any reason other than like at home or a very public place. Like I'd never. Like if my husband called me and said, hey, you want to meet me at this corner and make out? I mean, no.
Yeah,
it just seems kind of like just strange.
Yeah.
Like I think like if they were planning on some little rendezvous, it would have been better for them to just meet in a parking lot.
Yeah, I don't think he has anything to do
But
with
he
it.
also allegedly had the flu.
Oh, yeah. The whole dynamic of it all, of her stopping on the road to meet him, it's just a lot. So I think he's pretty much off the table, cleared. And speaking of that flu, another person who had the flu at that time would be her ex-husband, Joe. And we need to talk about him as well.
We did attempt to reach out to Steve, but we were unable to make contact. Understanding why he may want privacy, we respect him if he does. We want to thank MJ for her candor and shared desire to solve her mom's case. We also want to thank Dave and Julie. It's clear that the love that they have for their friends is one to envy. Next week, another suspect with an alibi. Please follow along and share on social media. Cold Case Chronicles on Facebook and Instagram, and at Cold Case Crew on Twitter. And as always,
have the day you deserve.
Especially if you kill someone on the way home.
I know your secrets and I'm telling on you.